Okay, so this is Catherine Lambrecht. This is Chicago Foodways Roundtable, which is part of Culinary Historians, blah, blah, blah. And we love it. All right, so our program tonight is my friend Linda Eilks. She grew up on a farm in Oakford. Oh, she grew up on a farm outside of Oakford, Illinois. And after careers at both Illinois Extension and U.S. Department of Agriculture, she retired and moved into a home within the village of Oakford. There she was faced with an abundance of pecans falling from the trees in her yard. She researched what to do with them and found some interesting historical facts about the pecan trees in the area. She will talk about the pecan trees in general, those that, especially those that grow around Oakford and her yard, of course. But long time ago, Linda and I have known each other, I think, from the early 90s. She was a University of Illinois extension educator, and practically the first day she walked into her office, she heard about me because I had been every 2 months or so inquiring at the office whether or not they were going to teach a class on home food preservation. And indeed, we made it happen. And it was really, it's a talent I really value. And I can't thank Linda enough for doing that. Plus, the woman who directed it at the University of Illinois. What was her name again?
Susan Brewer.
Susan Brewer. She's now retired, but she was really quite a and Linda had the distinction of actually following her program and teaching what was being taught. That was not always uh, well. I will be undiplomatic and say there were some places where the instructor taught it the way they thought it should be taught and not the way Susan thought it should be taught. And Susan was really, really good. So I'm going to turn this over to Linda, who's going to talk about pecans. And then I will finish with an update on what I have learned about uh, Dickinson Squash because Linda helped me with that as well.
Okay, so I'm Linda Eilks, and I'm going to talk today about pecan trees. As Catherine said, those that grow in Oakford and especially around where I live. Um, Before we get started, here's a few jokes. Where do nuts go for a quick energy boost? The nearest Shell station. I can't hear you laughing, you're all muted. Um, why didn't the pecan go to the ballet? It was afraid of the nutcracker. What do squirrels eat at the fair? A corn dog. Get it? Acorn. Okay. Okay. And so how do you pronounce pecan? The proper pronunciation is pecan, not pecan, as it is pronounced in the South. As an industry joke goes, a pecan is what your grandmother puts under her bed. I found this comment on a video of the pecan industry when they were visiting USDA in Washington. So, are we feeling nutty yet? Let's begin. As it was said, I grew up on a farm. And when I was in grad school, my parents bought this house in Oakford, which was my great uncle's in the village. Our village is only now it's about 200 people. And I didn't even think about it. I should have put a map on here where we're at. But if you're familiar with Springfield, Illinois, and you drive northwest, and you'll come to the town of Petersburg, which is our county seat, and then we're another 10 miles past Petersburg. So it's about 45-minute drive from Springfield. My husband and I bought the house from my parents' estate, and then we rented it out for 11 years before I could retire from my job in Washington, D.C. Moving back, I knew we had pecan trees on our property. We have 4 trees and a 5th one on the border with our neighbor. Okay, so there's our trees, the big tall trees, and then there's another picture of our yard. Okay, here's some basic information about pecans. The Latin name for the pecan is, if I pronounce it right, Caria Illinoisensia. In other words, the name reflects the name of Illinois. The pecan is the only nut tree native to North America and native to the tributaries of the Mississippi River. They thrive on rich soils of its valley, from Illinois to the Gulf of Mexico. The Sangamon River is one of the Mississippi River tributaries. The Sangamon runs into the Illinois River, which runs into the Mississippi. And so this Sangamon River is only about a mile north of our home. Pecans require a lot of water, as much as 150 to 250 gallons per day for a mature tree during the growing season. Central Illinois gets about 40 inches of rain per year, so that's not enough. Not only are we near the river, but we were also over an aquifer here. Both are very useful for this tree. Once bearing, trees can produce up to 300 years, and each tree can produce approximately 25 to 40 pounds per tree. Pecans have a rich and distinctive flavor and texture. It has one of the highest fat contents of any vegetable product and a caloric value close to that of butter. Yet, the pecan is heart healthy and contains antioxidants, 19 vitamins and minerals, fiber, and is a healthy fat. Pecan trees, I just looked this up today as Catherine and I were talking about it, are monoecious, which means they have both female and male parts, enabling them to self-pollinate, but benefit from cross-pollination. The male flowers, which are the pollen, which it's this long, I'll have a slide later to show you. And it's released during the wind in the spring, while female flowers cluster at the tips of the branches. Successful nut production relies on effective pollination, and so planting compatible pecan varieties can enhance your yields up to 20%. So after I read this today, because there was somebody I was talking to a couple weeks ago, and she said she has a pecan tree in her yard, but it's never had any pecans. And I was wondering if they don't have another one to cross-pollinate with. Okay, a local history. I found some local history that illustrates how pecans are native to our area. I read that even before Oakford was a town, the area was called Pecan Bottoms. There's a spring, a spring-fed, what they call Pecan Run, just north of here on the other side of the Sangamon River. And like my father, he said that's where the swimming hole was when they were growing up. And then west of Oakford, along the river bottom, is an area that was called Pecan. Well, I think it still maybe is Pecan Grove if you get close enough to the river. Most of that land has been, the trees have been taken out and it's been cultivated. But near that grove was a church called Pecan Chapel. Later, they moved it into the village of Oakford, and it's now the Oakford United Methodist Church. Okay, food history. Catherine gave me some of this information back when I first was dealing with my pecans. We think of pecans as coming from Georgia. However, while pecans are native to Illinois and south to Texas and Mexico, it was an introduced crop to Georgia indirectly due to the Civil War. The pecan pie has far more Midwest roots than Southern. The company who offers the world Cairo syrup, a key ingredient for the pie, was headquartered in New York and Chicago. One of the earliest recipes for pecan pie was a community cookbook published in St. Louis with a recipe submitted from Texas. Next slide. What I found most fascinating about the pecan history in our area was reading in this local book titled Living in the Shadow of Greatness by Raymond Montgomery, who has now passed on. But living in the shadows of greatness refers to Abraham Lincoln because this is the county where New Salem is, and he lived here for a long time. But anyway, in this book, it has an excerpt about gathering pecans. It was a reminiscence of James McGrady Rutledge, noted down by him a short time before his death. And I want to read you most of the passage because it's quite interesting. I must tell of pecan hunt I was in when I was 17 years old. This would have been in 1831. There is a place among the Sangamon River that is thickly timbered with pecan trees, and which is called the Pecan Bottom. We had 2 wagons and teams. I was in one and 6 persons in the other. We all lived in the same settlement. It was 7 miles to where the pecans were. When we got there, the whole bottom was covered with pecan hunters, and we were very much discouraged. Some of old Shick Shack's tribe, this was a local Indian tribe around here, were on the other side of the river. We were all acquainted with them, and 2 of the Indians' men came over to see us. They told us to come over to the north side of the river, that there were plenty of pecans there, and they were easy to get. When we got ready to cross the river, the Indians showed us where the ford was, and I crossed our team and wagons. We struck out for the Indian camp about a quarter mile from the river. We stayed with the Indians 2 nights and had a fine time. It was 12 o'clock before we laid down to sleep. The next day, we went up the river and found the trees loaded with pecans. 2 of the Indian women went with us and helped us pick until noon. Then Father told them to pick for themselves. They would get $1 a bushel for all they could pick from the people on the other side of the river, taking them across by canoe. We picked for 3 days and collected about 10 bushel of pecans, filled our cooking vessels with possums, and killed some wild turkeys. At the same time, it was against the law to cut pecan trees. So we cut a pole 20 feet long, squared the butt end, scraped the bark off the tree about shoulder high, and 2 of the men took a pole on each of their shoulders and ran 12 or 15 steps and let it come against the tree with such a force that it would jar the tree and the pecans would fall with such a shower. In such quantities, one could hardly believe. Okay, now that's the science and some history. And so now here's my experience. We moved to our Oakford house in late 2021. I didn't even notice the pecans that first year. The next summer, I noticed small branches falling from the pecan trees. I assumed that the squirrels were the culprit, but after taking the Master Gardener course with Extension, I discovered that the culprit is something called a twig girdler. The beetle lays eggs about 50 to 100 in the end of the branch, then chews around the branch so that it will fall off. The eggs hatch and use the dead branch as food. They don't kill the tree, but it will decrease the production of the nuts. I was constantly picking up these twigs and taking them to our burn pile to deplete the population of the beetles. But then I realized that there are so many pecan trees in Oakford that this was a fruitless effort. In 2022, as the pecans began to fall, I was very excited to harvest them. I had bought a nut roller gatherer, and I had seen this on a public TV food show, so I was ready. I was motivated to gather the nuts because I recall that the grass under the pecan tree doesn't grow very well. So this way I could clean the ground for the grass. It was mid-September and I collected 2-quart jars of pecans. I was very excited and thought this might be all. However, they started coming down steadily in mid-October. Sometimes I was out gathering every day. One morning I saw the squirrels collecting the pecans, so I ran out to get to them first and ended up collecting pecans 3 times that day. I got obsessed. Just as a little info for you, we have white squirrels in Oakford, not a lot of them. I read that they are not albinos, but they are a genetic variant resulting from gray and red squirrels. So by late October that year, I had collected and washed 57 pounds of nuts. I know I didn't get them all. The squirrels got many of them, and I gave up um, on one of the trees because the pecans were so small. My last collection was on November 23rd. Although there's still more nuts out there, I made myself stop. I learned in my research the way to harvest and clean pecans. You wash them in hot water because they've been on the ground and it's necessary to sanitize the shell before you crack it. A commercial grower must wash the pecans at 170 degrees for at least 5 minutes. I don't have that kind of hot water, so I washed them in the hottest water my house would provide and washed them multiple times until the water was clean. Next, the pecans must dry for about 2 weeks. This is to let the meat of the nut come away from the shell so they're easier to crack. I would lay the nuts out on my dining room table, as in this picture, on the tablecloth and let them dry for a day or two. But because I had so many pecans, I put them into bowls and labeled each bowl with the date that I gathered them and stirred them with a wooden spoon each day. Once 2 weeks had passed, then I would bag them. I shelled a few, but I put many of the bags in the freezer in their shells. I learned that pecans can be stored in the freezer, shelled or unshelled, for up to 5 years. I actually still have some in there. Because I had so many pecans and I didn't know what to do with them, I gave some bags to local friends who, and then I sent out an email to many of my friends across the country asking them if they wanted pecans. I ended up mailing out 17 1-pound bags of pecans. Now that the harvest was over, there was still work to do. Although the nuts come down in the fall, throughout the winter and spring, the husks fall from the trees. In the fall and the next spring, I raked and raked up all the husks that were left over and the leftover pecans. It was a lot of work. Here you'll see the nut has a husk around it. It opens up and then the nut drops out. Sometimes the husk will come with the nut to the ground, but usually they stay in the tree until later. I had met a woman in southern Illinois who grows pecans commercially. She was quite surprised to hear that my home had pecans this far north. She told me that pecans only produce every other year. My research confirmed that pecans produce nuts every other year, and that homeowners are lucky if they get a good crop every 4 to 5 years. So after the first fall, I was encouraged that I wouldn't have to collect nuts the following year. Also, this woman in Southern Illinois told me that in the spring, when the pollen comes down from the pecans, that you'll have nuts. Well, that next spring, the pollen came down very thick. Additionally, at this point, I didn't really care if that twig girdler was going to hinder my production of pecans or not. Okay, now it was 2023. The pecans came down again. I felt that there was even more this year than the previous year. I collected a couple of 5-gallon buckets of pecans and gave them away with instructions of how to clean them and dry them. For the rest, we rake them up and burn them in our burn pile. Everything I read so far had stated that pecans only produce every other year. I also read that researchers were working to develop trees that produced annually. So maybe these researchers need to visit us in Oakford, as I had 2 years in a row of a lot of pecans. That fall and into the spring of 2023, those husks continued to come down. Peter, my husband, and I did a lot of raking and burning. So this shows the green pecan in its husk, or the green husk. So now it was 2024. As spring approached, there was more raking before the grass could grow. I told Peter that I couldn't continue to rake every year. It was too much work. So we researched and ordered a lawn sweeper so that we could clean up the husks and the nuts. In the spring, the lawn was littered with pecan pollen, so I assumed that we were going to have nuts again. Um, this is a branch that had come down in August of that year. But come fall, there were no pecans. I mean, maybe I collected 5 or something. So, that was kind of surprising. I had given a presentation about pecans at our county fair and again for our historical society. And through that, I got names of 4 people who wanted to come to my house and collect pecans. But I had to disappoint them last year. So now the next slide. So now this year, the pecans are falling again. I've been collecting them pretty much every day. And so far, 2 of those 4 people have come to collect, and the other 2 couldn't make it because of some different things. Anyway, so I'm taking them bags of pecans, but also giving them instructions about washing them and drying them. But at this point, I think we're just gonna let them stay on the ground, and we'll take that lawn sweeper to them. Although these pecans are a pain to manage, they create great shade, and I feel that they are a symbol of Oakford. Therefore, I am trying to cultivate a new pecan tree. They sprout in our flower beds, so I dug up one this spring and tried to transplant it. The taproot, which was really surprising, was about twice as long as the sprout, but it failed. I tried with another sprout, but it failed also. And then I think I read online that it's really hard to do it. You pretty much have to do it from seed. Um, now what I've done in this picture, I've created a flower bed where I want a pecan tree to grow. So we'll see what happens. I also read that it'll take 4 to 12 years before they'll produce nuts. None of our Oakford pecans are as big as what you will find in the store, but they're very tasty. Um, I still have my pecans from 2022 in the freezer. Haven't gone through them yet because I had so many. Now, so that's pretty much my presentation, but I want to leave you with this little poem that I found. Here is a southerner, graceful and slim. In flavor, no nut is quite equal to him. Ah, Monsieur Pecan, you know what it means to be served with black coffee in French New Orleans. So that's the end of my nutty story. Thank you.
Yes, for all the years that I had been talking about pecans, until you sent me that box a few years ago, that was the first time I had seen native Illinois pecans.
Yeah, I heard on a podcast, it was about the tariffs, but it was a Canadian company that imports nuts from all over the world, and they were mentioning that they import nuts from a farm and she calls them native pecans, out of Missouri. So I guess there are people who like maybe in my yard and try to sell them. But from what I've heard, and I can go around Oakford and I can tell which trees are the pecan trees because they lose their leaves late and they have a different distinctive look to them. And but yeah, most people would rather not have them, and I think some people have even cut them down out of their yards because they don't want to deal with them.
Do you have many people who put out a sign selling pecans near you?
No, no.
I saw one for the first time. I was south of Carbondale, and I was on my way to this small town, and there was a sign. But I thought, oh, I'll take a picture of it on the way back, and of course didn't go back the same way. But I only found so far that one sign, and it was
The lady
somebody's.
that I met in Southern, she's down south of like Carbondale area.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know if it was her farm or not.
No idea, no idea. But I was thrilled. I mean, first that you even gave me an example of a pecan from grown in Illinois. Though I did learn a few weeks ago there is at least one pecan tree in Lake County. And if anybody's been to any of my recent talks, I feature an apple, a 19th century apple collector, and he bought one, Caria Illinoisensis, in Iowa and brought it home with him and planted it in his yard in Lake County because it's not supposed to be growing here. There,
It'll
there is an area, but not
it'll
here.
be interesting if it produces pecans since it doesn't have a another variety with it.
Apparently, he's getting pecans, but I'll double check.
Oh,
I will
had it
double
for a
check.
while. Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I just saw them a few weeks ago. That's when I found out the big reveal. So
And
I'm going to talk a little bit about pumpkin pie. Not so much pumpkin pie, but the squash that the pumpkin comes from. But Linda, I hope is going to contribute because she's part of the story. Not what I wanted to do. Well, hold on. I'll just go through. Look at that. Woo! Oh, well, here, let me go back. That's those apples that you see there. That's the same person that has the pecan tree. Just so you know, another one of those thrilling moments. Hold on, I'll get there. There we go. Year and a half ago, roughly, I was in Greenview, Illinois, which is not far from where Linda happens to live. And I did a talk on pies with them 2 days in a row. It was a Saturday and Sunday. And one of the things I made a point of asking people was whether or not they had access to these Dickinson squash. This is the sugar pie pumpkin. Those are those little ones that you buy at the grocery store for what, $1 to $2, $3, depending on what the deal is. Um, what? Okay. All right. But the Dickinson squash. So Elijah Dickinson moved to Illinois from Tennessee in 1835, and he initially landed in Eureka. He built a house in Washington, and eventually he came to Morton. All three locations at one point or another, they also did canning, but initially canning of, tomatoes and beans and corn, that kind of stuff. But it was in the 1890s that they began to experiment with canning pumpkin. Um, but the pumpkin they used, they have these seeds, and it's referred to as a Dickinson squash, but it's a cross, they believe, between a Tennessee field pumpkin, which also has the nickname cheese wheel, and a butternut squash. The Tennessee pumpkin, the flavor isn't very good. It's sort of stringy. It wasn't ideal, but matched with the butternut squash, it was substantially improved. And so the what you see on the left is a true Dickinson squash, but it's a small one. It's only 14 pounds because these grow to 40 pounds. And and here we have, the pumpkin right next to it, just to the and one is moschata, so that's a squash, and the other one's peppo, which is or curcupita peppo, which is pumpkin. So our pumpkin pies are not from pumpkins, but from squash. But it's a squash that really delivers. Now, I cut it open. Now, remember, this is a small one, and I'm not sure what the 40-pound profile looks like because one of the things that they always comment is that there's a small area where the seeds collect, sort of like with the buttermilk, I mean, the butternut squash. But this being a small version, it could be the much larger one has even more meat, around it. I don't know. I haven't gotten one yet to really look at. Uh, and and what, by the way, and so this is I roasted these. I got the flesh. I made, I think, pumpkin custard rather than pumpkin, but I followed the recipe on the back of the Libby's can, and it tasted just like you would expect a Libby's canned pumpkin pie to taste, except it was brighter in color. And I went to a talk. I was in a, doing a talk reasonably recently, and this woman just loudly proclaimed that the Libby's canned pumpkin is is dyed. Look at that brown color it has. And I said, no, that's not dye. That is what happens when it's been pressure processed. Take a look at green beans and other things. They don't quite look the same as when they were put fresh in the jar. And it applies to this, which, by the way, from what I've been told, when the Dickinson squash goes in for processing, it takes 90 minutes before it's in the can. Whereas if you do it at home, let's say just to take a regular the little cucurbita peppo, you're sitting there waiting for the darn thing to drain of excess liquid in its several hours. So it's really a fast process once they get going. Um, Now in 1929 and 2010, there was a shortage of pumpkin. Now, Linda and I were talking about this picture before you all arrived, and it's sort of it's not my picture, unfortunately. I really need a good picture, but everything I've been told is the pumpkins are rolled to the edge of the field. I don't know how it's done, and then a truck comes by and picks it up. Well, in 2009 and 2010, they weren't able to collect everything because there was so much rain. They were damaging the fields trying to collect it. So they came to a point. Now they actually have so right now the Dickinson squash is grown in an 80-mile diameter of Morton. They now have some fields growing in Michigan as a backup. Um, Oh, and this, of course, pumpkin pie is the Illinois state pie, and I did, offer my letter of endorsement toward it. I don't think it mattered very much, but they didn't invite me to the signing party either. And that's a sweet potato pie, but back here we have a pumpkin pie. And by the way, the recipe on the back of the Libby's can, um, Dickinson family members developed that recipe. They had sold their farm, whatever, to Libby's in the late 1920s. Um, I haven't found precisely why, but it's been suggested it was related to the economic crash. But they sold it to Libby's, but they continued to manage the fields. And at one point, Libby said, we would like to have a recipe on the back of the can. And I did a talk in Moline, and a woman came up to me who was a Dickinson family member, and it was her great grandmother and aunt who worked together to develop the recipe. And at the Libby's plant, they bake that recipe daily to check every batch. So it still continues on. It still continues on. Uh, but Linda, can you tell them about how you got me my cucurbita? That was whatever.
So, backing up a little bit, not in the county I'm in, but once you go across the Sangamon River, the next county is Mason County, and they do a lot of that production growing there of different, soybeans, cabbage, etc. Um, and my sister had told me that one year she had gotten what we know now is called a Dickerson pumpkin or squash, and she was so excited, and she took it home and processed it to and froze the meat. And she said she'd gotten it because it had fallen off one of the trucks. Okay. So last year, there's a store in Havana that I like to frequent. And I was going there one day, and there were all these Dickerson squashes out in front of the store. And it said, free pumpkins. And I asked, why they were there. And she said that the owner of the store was cultivating a field that year, and I guess these were just excess or something. So I brought them home and processed them. And then one of the things I learned is because I still do a lot of canning, and you can freeze pureed pumpkin, but you're not supposed to can it. You have to cube it. So that was a little bit extra work. Anyway, so then I ran into Catherine at Greenview, and I think we were talking about the pumpkins, and I told her that I had gotten one. And she really wanted one. And I said, okay, I'll see what I can do. And my sister said, go out on these roads. And so I did. And I came across two fields that had already been harvested. But I could see pumpkins or squash out there. So I parked the truck and walked into the field. But every time I come across one of those squash, they were actually broken. So then after a little bit, I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to find one. And I was heading back to the truck. This field circled around a farmhouse. And this lady yells at me and says, you want one of those pumpkins? And I said, yeah. And she goes, how many? I said, I just want one. So she had collected, four or five. And anyway, so she gave me the one. And then it was a function of meeting up with Catherine so I could give her the squash.
And that was rather dramatic because you went and got your flu shot
Yeah.
and COVID shot, and we met by the Abraham Lincoln Library.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you gave me a really nice bag. I just would have grabbed something from it was one of those, like pumpkin gift bags. And I'm like, heck, I would have just grabbed a plastic bag from the grocery store. But it really made my day to finally have one to touch and
Yeah.
cook and experience.
So, Catherine, as you were giving your presentation, it made me think, I wonder if would be a way to organize a tour of the processing plant.
I have heard they don't, but I will ask anyway.
Yeah.
It never hurts to ask, They might say yes.
Yeah, that would be really interesting to see the process.
It sure would be. And by the way, Kelly liked your jokes.
Oh, good. Yeah, it's kind of hard not having feedback, but
I'm so sorry. I should have. I'm just so And then Nancy Webster found information about Petersburg. It's
oh,
Petersburg, right? So if
yeah.
somebody wants to link to that. Now, Jeffrey says, why not leave the pecans and husks on the ground if you didn't want to rake? Was anyone cleaning up in the years before you took over?
So I can remember our visiting mom and dad when they lived here, and she would have these buckets of them that obviously they had raked them up. But basically, the grass won't grow because it just gets so cluttered with all of that. And I mean, it's still, even after raking it up, the grass isn't the best grass. But yeah. And what I've noticed this year, there's a lot of pecans coming down with their husks, which I didn't see in the past. And I don't know if that has to do with weather or what. I mean, the husk is almost open or half open, but I figured those probably aren't the ones to pick up.
Rebecca said, how do you shell them without breaking the nuts?
Ah, and because these pecans are much smaller, it's very challenging. Um, I rarely get an entire half when I crack them. So,
I did it. In my other talk, I have a picture where I show the pecan you get at the grocery store against the pecan that came from your place, and it's much smaller.
yeah,
But I found it was devil of a time just to get a whole nut, just for demonstration purposes. I went through a lot of pecans before I finally had one that looked
yeah.
nice.
But I don't know what your feeling was, but I think they're tastier than the ones in the store.
Oh, they're delicious,
Yeah.
no question. And you went to a lot of trouble to keep it that way. I mean, I didn't realize how much cleaning and everything you went
A
into it.
lot of work. And I don't really want to do that. I mean, once the whatever in my freezer is depleted, then I'll process some more, but not to the quantity that I did that first year.
Well, enthusiasm, you know. Cynthia
Yeah.
Clampett says, I've always loved the fact that the word pecan comes from the Algonquin word pecan, Pacan, which means nut you need to stone to crack.
Okay.
I'll send you a copy of the
I think I
chat.
might have run across that when I was doing my research, but yeah.
And Mr. Flick said one of my college roommates claimed that an aunt of his created the pie recipe on the Libby's label. This was decades ago. Could be the same people. Who knows? But it's still a cool story. Still a
Mm.
cool story. Uh, on Facebook, there are gatherer groups that will come and harvest things like black walnuts. You just post and then direct message people to come and clean up for you. Well, I don't know if that's something you wish to do, but it's
Well,
out there.
and what I was told in this village was that there was a woman who, like, I guess she would go around and collect them in everybody's yard, and then I guess she processed them or spent the winter cracking them or whatever. I don't know, but then she would, I can't remember but anyway, she would give a gift of something that she did from the pecans to the people where she'd gathered them. And then one of my neighbors was telling me that there used to be some people come from, there's a town called Chandlerville, which is west of here, that they used to come and collect the pecans, but they haven't seen them for years.
Wow. Yeah, it's it's always. I mean, there's things that just come and go, and then people lose whatever the technique was, whatever it might be related to pecans, and
Well, I
then
just think about how, I mean, this whole area must have just been so thick with pecans at one time, and now it's just mostly farm fields. There's still, I can tell there's still pecan trees along the banks of the river. Um, but once you get far enough away from the river that they can cultivate it, then it's just turned into farming, corn and soybeans.
I would think is your pecan trees. I think you would consider them native, right?
Yeah. So my understanding about Oakford was the original settler, his name was Sam Lounsbury, and his farmhouse is where I live now. It's not the same farmhouse, but on this property. And he had a big farm here. And here's a little Abe Lincoln story. So Abe Lincoln had bought, with another partner, had bought some land to the east of here where they thought that there was going to be a ferry developed to cross the Sangamon. And this was one of his failed adventures. And it didn't happen because the railroad came through where Oakford is now. And so that's how Oakford developed. And so these trees were already here, and people just built their houses around them.
And now, Rebecca, I don't know if you heard earlier, but a friend of mine in Lake County does have a pecan tree, and he bought it in Iowa and then just brought it here because you said it was not easy to transplant
Well, I
the.
suppose once the tree is growing, like a few years old, then you could probably dig out the root ball and move it. But just as that little sprout, I mean, it was just, I watched it in the flower bed, and so it was the second spring so it was still small, and it just didn't work.
I have a tickle of a memory, and I'm not quite 100% sure, but black walnuts, they give out an enzyme. So if you want to grow tomatoes and things like that, you just can't in a region around it. And I think pecan also has this, but
Well,
Not
I was
100%
reading that
sure.
pecans are in the same family as walnuts. So,
Okay, so then that makes sense.
mhm.
Cynthia says you could transplant them, but there is no guarantee the trees will produce nuts. Pecans are notoriously specific in their requirements, which is why they haven't been. uh, I've heard since then that pecans at one point were not, people tried to grow them overseas and it failed. But there has been some, and I don't even know where they did succeed in getting a pecan to grow. But I haven't heard what the progress was after that.
Well, probably the biggest thing is the water requirement.
That's a lot.
It is. Yeah.
That's, 150 gallons.
Yeah, a day.
That's like having one of those championship pumpkins.
And that little sprout that I tried to transplant in the taproot. I mean, I had to dig and dig and dig to get the whole taproot. And I was just shocked how big it was. And I was reading online that okay, it has this big taproot, but it also then starts developing lateral roots, and they're like, I don't know, 10, 15 feet deep. And over time, the taproot may actually disappear.
Oh, okay. Now Jeffrey said, "Are pecans not known in Europe?" They're known in Europe.
Well, they're
They
not.
love them. They love them. Because I
They're
have a
not.
friend who lives in Amsterdam, and a bag of pecans goes a long way to making her happy. But they're not grown in Europe. That's all. Europe is actually pretty cold compared to where we are right now. Because
So,
Rome,
how
go
did you
ahead.
take the nuts to your friend in Amsterdam?
I
Because
mailed them, but this was a long time ago.
this
Why
is
are there
already shelled.
prohibitions?
Yeah, because I looked
They
it
were.
up because there's a friend of mine that wanted some, and I looked it up, and because it's a nut that could potentially grow, it's prohibited.
Oh, well, it happened.
But
I
if
don't
you,
think I mailed it. I think I went to visit and I just threw them in the
yeah,
suitcase.
that's probably an easier way to take them. And if they're already shelled, I think that, shows that you couldn't plant it and make it grow.
Yeah, but they're very, very well received.
Oh yeah.
People are very happy. When I was living in England, they thought I was saying piquant. Oh, piquant. Oh, okay. Because they didn't know what pecans were. And when I went to France in 2004, an expat was visiting, asked that I bring pecans. Yeah,
Mhm.
they're delicious. Absolutely delicious. So now you grew up in that town, or you grew up outside of town?
I grew up on a farm that's about 4 miles east of here. And
Okay,
another little bit of history. The farm that I grew up on was the farm that Peter McHugh, the first quarter horse, was raised at.
I didn't know.
Yeah, it was born on a different farm, but it was raised and trained on the farm where I lived. And in its heyday here in Oakford, they had a racetrack, and on the weekends they'd have up to 6,000 people. And across the river is a town called Kilburn, and they also had a racetrack. And racing, a lot of people start gambling and drinking, right? And in Kilburn, somebody got in a fight and shot somebody and he died. And so then Oakford and Kilburn both went dry. Well, that also killed the racing. And the horse people picked up their horses and moved to Texas. So that's why you know of quarter horses coming from Texas.
That happens. That happens. In fact, I learned something recently. I went to a lecture. It was about Russell, Illinois, which is on the border of Illinois and Wisconsin, and they banned drinking in Russell. But somebody opened a soda pop thing and had to get a license for that. And I learned recently the reason they had to get a license was because all those bubbles come from fermentation. Maybe you're not going to get excited like with alcohol, but that was their way of kind of limiting access. You don't want to get those people into trouble. Well, Linda, this was fun. This was fun. And I've known her for years, so I'm always learning something new about living out there.
Yeah.
I would say more, but then I think I'm digging up stuff you don't want to necessarily tell
I
whoever
mean,
else
it's
is
a big
lingering.
change from living in the DC area. I lived in Alexandria, which is a wonderful place to live, but this was home, and it's been interesting getting
Reacquainted.
reacquainted, thank you, with everybody. So, well,
Well,
thanks
welcome home.
everybody.
And I'll see you soon. And Linda has been, at least the last few years, and hope she continues, a judge for us at the Illinois State Fair.
I enjoyed it.
I know you do. I enjoy it too. All righty. Well, have a good evening. Happy Thanksgiving, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. And Linda, I'll see you one of these days.
Right.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.